The wind rolled through the canyon like a whisper carrying secrets from another time. It was the kind of wind that could chill the soul, even under the warm Arizona sun. Dust curled along the dry earth as a lone figure stumbled down a narrow trail, her skirt torn, her boots caked with dirt. The hem of her dress fluttered against her knees, as if the desert itself wanted to claim her too. She was young, maybe 20 at most, but the weariness in her eyes made her seem older. Her name was Clara, though no one had called her that, with kindness in a long while. She had left behind a small settlement a few miles back, a place that had once been her home, though it never felt like one. The wooden fences, the church bell, the faces she had known since childhood, all now carried the same cold rejection. Her father's voice still echoed in her mind, sharp as a whip, telling her she was no longer welcome. She hadn't expected it to come to this, not after everything she'd done to try to belong. But that morning when the truth came out, when they saw her as a burden instead of family, the door had closed for good. Now, all she had was the open land stretching endlessly before her. The desert was vast and cruel, but it didn't judge her. It didn't turn her away. The sun hung low, painting the horizon in red and gold, and somewhere beyond those distant mesas, she hoped she might find a place where she could start over. But hope was a fragile thing out here, and as night crept in, the sound of distant drums began to rise from the hills. She froze. The rhythm was faint at first, almost mistaken for the beat of her own heart. But then it grew louder, more deliberate, echoing off the rocks. She had heard stories of the Apache, the warriors who moved like shadows, who could strike without warning. The settlers whispered about them around campfires, their tales full of fear. But she also knew those stories were told by people who never tried to understand them. Still, standing there alone, she felt that same fear crawl up her spine. The night deepened fast. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the stars began to pierce the dark sky like tiny blades. She found shelter near an old cottonwood tree beside a shallow stream, though the water barely moved. Her throat burned from thirst, but she only took a few sips. She didn't dare light a fire. Every sound in the dark made her heart jolt. The desert had its own kind of silence, one that felt alive, always listening. She leaned against the rough bark and tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't quiet. The image of her father turning away haunted her more than the fear of being found. He had said she brought shame. He had said she was better off gone. No apology, no second chance, just exile. Then came a rustle nearby. It was small at first, like the sound of an animal stepping through dry grass. But soon she heard another, and another. She sat up, clutching a rock in her trembling hand. Her eyes darted through the shadows. A figure stepped out from the darkness. Tall, broad-shouldered, and silent as the night itself. The faint light from the moon touched the edges of his face, revealing dark, painted markings across his skin. His eyes were unreadable, sharp like flint, watching her with quiet intensity. He was Apache, she didn't need to be told. His presence carried the weight of the wild itself, untamed, commanding, and dangerous. She couldn't move. The rock slipped from her hand, hitting the ground softly. For a moment neither of them spoke. The wind sighed between them, carrying the scent of dust and cedar. He looked at her as though trying to understand why she was there, why a young woman in torn clothes and trembling hands would be wandering alone in Apache land. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, low, and steady. His words were in his own tongue, ones she couldn't understand, but the tone wasn't cruel. It was cautious, questioning. I mean no harm, she stammered, her voice breaking. I'm just passing through. He tilted his head slightly, still watching her. The tension between them thickened, but she could sense he wasn't about to attack. There was curiosity in his gaze, maybe even disbelief. He took a slow step forward, and she took one back. The air shifted. In that moment, Clara realized something. She wasn't just lost in the desert. She had wandered into a world that belonged to someone else, a world her people feared and misunderstood. And this man, whoever he was, stood as its guardian. A flicker of light caught his eye, her locket. It hung around her neck, the only thing she had left from her mother. He gestured toward it. She froze, unsure what he wanted, but when she didn't move, he reached forward. His hand brushed the chain lightly, his touch deliberate but not cruel. For a heartbeat their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them. Strange understanding. Then, without warning, a shout rang out from beyond the rocks. Male voices, angry, drunk, familiar, settlers. Clara's breath caught. She knew those voices, her brothers. The Apache warrior's expression hardened instantly. He motioned for her to stay silent, his eyes sharp with warning. She crouched low behind the tree as her brother's lanterns bobbed through the dark. She couldn't have gone far. One of them barked. "I said she's on her own now! Let the coyotes have her for all I care!" Clara pressed her hands over her mouth to keep from crying out. The warrior's hand rested on his weapon, his body still as stone. The men passed close, so close she could see the sweat glisten on their necks, but they didn't notice her. After a tense minute, their voices faded into the distance. Only then did she dare to breathe again. When she looked up, the warrior was still there, his gaze locked on hers. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt safer with him than she ever had back home. Something about the way he stood, the calm in his silence, told her he wasn't a man who took pleasure in cruelty. He was dangerous, yes, but not heartless. He pointed toward the horizon, where the moonlight touched the distant cliffs. It was clear he wanted her to follow. She hesitated. She didn't know him, didn't know where he would take her, but staying here meant her brothers might return. And the idea of facing them again, after the way they had thrown her out, was unbearable. So she nodded. They moved quietly through the desert, the stars lighting their path. She tried to keep up with his long strides, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Occasionally he glanced back, making sure she hadn't fallen behind. His movements were sure, fluid, almost animal-like. After what felt like hours, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Below she saw faint fires flickering in Apache camp. Her heart raced. She stopped, her fear returning full force. He turned to her, his expression unreadable, but his tone calm as he spoke again, softer this time. She didn't understand his words, but the gesture of his hand toward the camp made his meaning clear. He was telling her she'd be safe there. She wanted to believe him, but the stories she'd been told all her life about the Apache came flooding back, the raids, the revenge, the warnings whispered by terrified settlers. And yet, when she looked at him again, those fears began to blur. He wasn't what the stories described. There was no malice in his eyes, only strength, and something else she couldn't name. Still, as he led her down toward the flickering firelight, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she could never undo. Somewhere deep in the valley, a hawk cried out, and the night seemed to hold its breath. Clara followed him into the unknown, her heart pounding with fear and wonder both, unaware that the man before her was no ordinary warrior. He was the most feared among his people. And by dawn, she would no longer be free to leave. The firelight flickered across the valley floor, throwing long shadows that danced along the cliffs. Clara followed the Apache warrior down the slope, her heart hammering as the glow of the camp grew closer. She could hear faint voices, the rhythmic sound of drums, and the crackle of wood breaking under the flames. The air carried the scent of smoke and herbs. Every step she took felt heavier, pulled between fear and the strange pull of the man walking just ahead of her. He didn't speak again, but every motion was deliberate. Moved with purpose, not looking back until they reached the edge of the camp. Several figures turned to watch them. Clara could feel their eyes on her sharp, questioning, assessing. She didn't understand their words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were asking who she was and why she was here. The warrior answered them with calm authority, his voice low and firm. Whatever he said made the others quiet down, though the suspicion didn't fade from their faces. A woman stepped forward, her long dark hair tied back, her eyes fierce but kind. She looked at Clara with something between pity and curiosity. The woman said something to the warrior, then gestured for Clara to come closer. Clara hesitated until the man gave a small nod. The woman led her to a small area near one of the fires, where she was offered a blanket and a bowl of warm food. Clara's hands shook as she accepted it. She hadn't eaten since the morning before she'd been cast out. The smell of corn and herbs made her realize just how hungry she was. But she ate slowly, aware that every movement was being watched. The warrior stood nearby, speaking quietly with a few of the men. From the way they listened, Clara could tell he was someone important. There was respect in their posture, and even those who had looked at her with distrust seemed to step back when he spoke. When their eyes met again, Clara felt a strange mix of gratitude and unease. He had saved her from her brothers, from the desert even, but now she didn't know what he planned to do with her. The night stretched long, the stars bright above the canyon. Sleep didn't come easily. By morning, the camp was alive with quiet activity. Women prepared food, men tended to horses and sharpened weapons, children ran barefoot through the dust. Clara sat wrapped in the blanket, watching, feeling out of place among them. She noticed how they moved with rhythm and purpose, how their lives seemed built around community and strength. They were nothing like the stories she had been told. The warrior appeared again, carrying a water skin. He handed it to her without a word. His expression was serious but not unkind. When she tried to speak, he simply shook his head and pointed toward a nearby ridge, motioning for her to follow. She obeyed, unsure why. They climbed the rocky path until the camp was a small patch below them. The view stretched wide red earth, dry riverbeds, and distant mountains touched with light. For the first time, she saw the beauty of the land beyond its harshness. He spoke then, his words slow, as if choosing them carefully. "My name is Coda," he said, his accent heavy but his meaning clear. "You are in Apache land now." She nodded, her voice soft. "Clara." He studied her for a long moment before turning his gaze to the horizon. "Your people, they cast you out." It wasn't a question. Clara looked down, fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. "They said I brought shame. I didn't belong." There was silence between them for a while. Coda's expression didn't change, but she sensed he understood more than she expected. "Here, no one belongs unless they prove they are meant to stay," he said quietly. "A land takes what is weak." The words lingered in her mind. There was something in his tone that spoke of pain, of experience earned the hard way. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she didn't dare. Later that day, Clara was brought back to the camp. The woman who had helped her earlier gave her a clean dress made of soft hide and guided her to a stream to wash. The water was cold and clear, the kind that bit at the skin but felt pure. Clara saw her reflection for the first time in days, dust-smeared, hair tangled, eyes hollow. When she returned, Coda was waiting near his horse, speaking with an elder. The elder's face was lined with age, but his eyes were bright, sharp like the desert sky. He looked at Clara for a long time before speaking in a calm tone. Coda translated for her. "Says you walk a path you do not yet understand," Coda told her. "Says the spirits led you here." Clara frowned, unsure what to say. "The spirits. I didn't mean to come here." Coda gave a faint smile. "No one means to. Act. But the desert brings those who are meant to find it." The elder nodded, as if confirming something unseen, then walked away, leaving Clara more confused than before. Over the next few days, she began to notice how the people treated Coda. He wasn't just respected, he was feared. The way they stepped aside when he passed, the way silence followed his orders. There was power in his presence, but not cruelty. Some called him the Hawk, a name that carried weight in every whispered tone. She learned bits of their language, enough to understand simple phrases. The children were curious about her, sometimes laughing at her attempts to speak. The women taught her how to grind corn, how to braid herbs, how to move quietly when the men hunted. Still, she could feel the distance between her and them. She was an outsider. One night, as the fire burned low, Coda approached her again. The stars stretched endlessly above them. He sat across from her, the glow lighting the edges of his face. "You are not safe in your world," he said. "Your own people would have left you to die." Clara met his eyes. "Then what will you do with me? Keep me here." His expression didn't change, but his silence said more than words could. "You are under my protection," he finally said. "For now." "For now?" she asked quietly. He looked toward the fire. "Until I decide where you belong." Her stomach tightened. There was finality in his tone, but also something she couldn't name. He wasn't cruel, but there was no promise of mercy either. As the days turned into a week, Clara began to see another side of him. He was not only a warrior, but a man burdened by leadership. She saw the scars on his hands, the way his eyes darkened when he looked toward the horizon. He had lost people she could tell, maybe too many. She learned that his father had been a chief, a man known for his strength and wisdom. Coda had taken his place after a brutal raid years ago, when their camp had been attacked by soldiers from the north. The loss had marked him, made him wary of strangers. That's why her presence stirred unrest among his people. One evening, a storm rolled across the desert. Thunder rumbled through the valley, and the wind tore at the tents. The rain came hard and sudden, soaking everything. Clara huddled under a hide covering, watching as Coda and the others worked to secure the horses. In the flash of lightning, she saw his face, focused, fearless. The storm didn't shake him. When it finally passed, the camp was quiet again, except for the steady drip of water from the trees. Coda came to where she sat, his hair slick with rain. "You survived your first desert storm," he said, almost teasing. "I thought the wind would carry the whole camp away," she replied with a shaky laugh. "The desert tests everyone," he said simply. "Now it knows your strength." His words struck her deeply. For the first time since she'd been cast out, she felt seen not as someone unwanted, but as someone still standing. But the peace didn't last. That night, the same men who had been searching for her days ago were seen near the edge of the valley. Scouts brought word that they had been tracking her trail. The camp grew tense. Coda's expression turned hard when he heard. "They come for you," he said grimly. "Your family still hunts what they cast away." Fear washed over her. "They won't stop. They think I'm theirs to punish." He looked at her for a long moment, his voice low and steady. "Then they will learn she is no longer theirs to claim." His words hung in the air like thunder still echoing across the canyon. Clara didn't know what he meant, whether it was a promise or a warning, but she saw the resolve in his eyes. The same resolve that made others fear him. That night, the camp slept lightly. The fires were kept small, the guards doubled. Clara lay awake, listening to the sound of horses shifting and the soft hum of the desert wind. Somewhere out there, her past was coming closer. And beside her, under the watchful silence of the stars, waited the man who had taken her under his protection, yet might soon claim far more than that. The night felt different after the warning came. The air carried a heaviness that made every sound sharper, every movement more cautious. Clara lay awake near the dying fire, her heart unable to settle. The soft rhythm of the drum from a distant part of the camp was steady but faint, like a heartbeat under the desert wind. She could sense unease moving through the Apache camp as surely as the smoke that curled into the dark sky. Coda had gone silent since the scouts brought the message. He'd spent the evening talking with his men in low voices, his expression unreadable. Clara didn't need to understand their language to know what it meant. Her past was coming closer, and she had brought danger to their door. She wanted to tell him to send her away, to protect his people from what might follow, but she also knew he wouldn't listen. When the others finally drifted to sleep, she saw him standing at the edge of camp, his silhouette outlined by moonlight, still and alert. There was something in that stillness, a mixture of strength and burden that made her chest tighten. By morning, the camp moved with quiet urgency. Men checked weapons and tightened saddle straps, while women gathered supplies. The children were sent deeper into the valley with the elders. It was clear they were preparing for something. Clara stood near the fire, unsure where to go or what to do. The woman who had helped her before, the one called Taya, came to her side. Taya spoke softly, her English broken but kind. "You stay close to me. Coda say you not wander." Clara nodded, guilt pressing hard in her chest. "He thinks they'll come soon, doesn't he?" Taya's gaze shifted toward the cliffs. "Your people come with anger. They want what they think is theirs. Coda, he will not let them take." The words sent a chill through Clara. She knew her brothers. They were prideful, reckless, and mean when they drank. If they found her here, there would be no reasoning with them. If Coda fought them, there would be blood. Later that day, Coda called a small meeting near the main fire. Clara stayed back, watching as men gathered around him. His tone was calm, his gestures sharp and decisive. Every face turned toward him carried trust. This wasn't just his camp, it was his responsibility. One of the younger men, whose temper seemed quicker than his judgment, spoke loudly, pointing toward Clara. Though she couldn't understand his words, the meaning was clear enough. He blamed her for the danger they faced. Others murmured in agreement. Clara's stomach twisted. Coda turned his head toward the man, his expression turning cold. He said something short, his voice like stone. The younger man looked down, silent. The tension eased, but didn't disappear. When the meeting ended, Coda approached her. "You see now," he said quietly. "Fight for what is theirs, but they do not fight for strangers. I never wanted to bring this trouble, she said. If I leave now, maybe they'll follow me instead. His eyes narrowed slightly. If you go, they will find you before sunset. And when they do, they will bring soldiers after. This land has seen enough blood from your kind. His words hit hard. She could hear the anger beneath them, not just for her, but for everything her people had done to his. Then what can I do? She asked. He was silent for a long time. Finally he said, Stay where I can see you. When it comes, you will do nothing. I will handle it. She wanted to ask how, but the look in his eyes stopped her. There was a depth their storm she couldn't understand but somehow trusted. That night, as the camp quieted, Clara found herself drawn to the edge of the cliffs overlooking the valley. The moonlight turned the land silver, stretching far and empty. It was beautiful and lonely at the same time. Taya joined her, sitting beside her on the cool stone. Coda protect you because he owes something, Taya said after a long silence. Clara turned to her. Oh? Ata nodded. Long ago, soldiers take his sister, never find her. You remind him of her lost, left behind. Clara felt her throat tighten. So he's protecting me because of her. Maybe at first, Taya said softly. But now, he protect because he choose. The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Clara didn't know what to say. She looked out at the endless desert and wondered if Coda's sister had suffered the same fate she nearly had. It made her realize how deep the pain between their worlds truly ran. Before dawn, a scout returned with news. The settlers, her brothers among them, were only a few miles away. They had guns, horses, and torches. The tension in the camp became sharp, every sound echoing with nervous energy. Coda ordered the women and children to move higher into the canyons while the warriors stayed behind. Clara tried to help, carrying water and food, though her hands trembled the entire time. As she worked, she overheard some of the warriors talking quietly about Coda's plan. Though she couldn't understand all their words, she caught one thing: Clara trap. Wada wasn't planning to run, he was going to meet them head-on. When she found him near his horse, tightening the strap of his rifle case, she stepped forward. You can't fight them. They'll bring more men if you do. His gaze met hers, calm but unyielding. If I do nothing, they will think we are weak. They will come again and again. This land is ours. It has been for generations. I understand that, but... You do not, he interrupted quietly. Your people take everything they touch. They call it law, but it is only hunger. I fight so my people can still call this place home. His voice carried a quiet fury that made her heart ache. She couldn't argue with him. He was right. Her family, her settlement, they believed this land was theirs to claim. And now, because of her, the fight had come to his doorstep. When the sun rose, she stood on a ridge and watched as Coda and his men rode out. Dust rose behind them, glowing gold in the early light. The camp was silent, everyone watching their warriors vanish into the distance. Hours passed like slow-moving shadows. Every sound made her jump: the call of a hawk, the creak of leather, the wind through the rocks. Then faintly came the sound of gunfire. Short bursts at first, then louder, closer. The women gathered near the fire, whispering prayers. Taya gripped Clara's hand tightly, her face pale. The air was thick with dread. Clara couldn't stand waiting any longer. She broke away from the group and climbed toward the ridge again, ignoring Taya's calls behind her. From the top, she could see the edge of the valley below. Smoke drifted up from the brush, and figures moved in the distance, small and fast, clashing like shadows. The sound of shouting carried on the wind. She spotted horses, flashes of movement, and then Coda. He was unmistakable, even from far away, commanding his movements precise and fierce. Her brothers were there too. She could see the glint of their rifles, the same ones her father had used. The sight twisted her stomach. She could barely breathe as she watched the two sides collide in a blur of dust and fire. Then something unexpected happened. One of the horses from her family's group broke free and bolted straight toward the ridge where she stood. Its rider fell hard, rolling down the slope. Without thinking, Clara ran forward to help. When she reached him, she froze. It was her younger brother, his face streaked with dirt and blood. Clara gasped, his voice broken with disbelief. You're alive. Before she could speak, he grabbed her arm. "You have to come back with me. They're going to kill us all." She shook her head, tears blurring her sight. "Can't. You came here looking for blood. You don't understand," he said, his voice desperate. "Pa's gone mad. He said if we can't bring you home, we don't come back at all." Sent word to the soldiers. Her blood ran cold. Soldiers meant more death an entire regiment, not just a handful of settlers. Before she could answer, the sharp crack of a rifle echoed. Her brother flinched and Coda appeared out of the dust, his weapon drawn. For one heart-stopping moment, their eyes locked. Coda's filled with warning, her brother's with fear. Clara threw herself between them, shouting for Coda to stop. He froze, his expression torn between fury and disbelief. The noise of battle raged behind them, the air thick with gunpowder and smoke. Coda lowered his weapon, but his jaw tightened. "Go back to the camp," he ordered her, his voice rough. Clara looked at her brother, who was shaking, clutching his wounded arm. "He's hurt. He needs help." Coda's eyes hardened. "He is your blood, but he is also the enemy. You must choose." The words struck her like a blow. She looked between them, the man who had saved her life, and the brother who had once called her a disgrace. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The sound of approaching hooves thundered in the distance, a reminder that the storm wasn't over. Clara stood frozen, the weight of two worlds pressing down on her. Knowing whichever choice she made would change everything. The wind howled across the canyon as if the land itself was warning them of what was coming. Dust rose in thick clouds, stinging Clara's eyes as she stood between Coda and her wounded brother. The sound of battle roared behind them, shouts, gunfire, horses crying out in fear. The air was heavy with smoke and sand. Every heartbeat felt like it might be the last. Coda's expression was unreadable, his jaw set, eyes sharp as he looked from Clara to the man on the ground. Her brother's breathing came in ragged gasps, blood seeping through his torn sleeve. "He'll die if we don't help him," Clara said, her voice shaking. Coda's grip tightened on his rifle. "Came here to kill," he answered coldly. "And you'll do the same if you let him bleed out," she said, stepping closer. "You said your people fight for what's theirs, not for hate, so don't let it start with this." For a long moment, Coda didn't move. The war cries in the distance grew louder, closer. Finally, he let out a sharp breath and slung his rifle over his shoulder. He crouched beside her brother and tore a strip from his own cloak, wrapping it tightly around the wound to stop the bleeding. His movements were rough but steady. "If he slows us down, he stays behind," he said. Clara nodded quickly, relief flooding her chest. She helped Coda lift her brother onto his feet. They half-dragged, half-carried him toward a narrow ravine where the sound of the fight faded behind them. The ground shook from distant explosions. She could still hear shouts echoing against the stone. When they reached shelter behind a cluster of rocks, Coda set her brother down and scanned the horizon. The smoke from the valley was rising fast, curling into the orange sky. "They're moving toward the camp," he muttered. "Soldiers are close." Her brother's eyes opened weakly. "You have to stop them," he said, his voice trembling. "Pa told them you were hiding stolen settlers here. They'll burn everything." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She turned to Coda. "They think your people took me. They'll see this as a rescue, not an attack." Coda's eyes darkened. "That lie will kill everyone." He started to move toward his horse, but Clara caught his arm. "You can't fight them all," she said. "You'll be outnumbered." "I have no choice," he answered quietly. "If they reach the camp, they'll kill the old, the weak, the children. I will not let that happen." She looked at him, seeing not just the warrior, but the leader, burdened by every life depending on him. The storm of dust around them made it hard to breathe. She felt torn between two worlds that were never meant to meet, yet here they were colliding in blood and smoke. Her brother tried to rise, his voice faint. "Clara, come with me. You can still leave before it's too late." She stared at him. "Go back to what? It's the people who cast me out?" His eyes flickered with guilt. "Pa was wrong. He thought you were a curse, but he didn't mean it. We just couldn't bear. He couldn't bear to see me make my own choice," she cut in. "And now you're here because of that same pride?" Coda's gaze moved between them, the tension in his shoulders clear. "We cannot stay here," he said firmly. "Soldiers will follow the sound of the fight." Clara looked down at her brother, who was too weak to stand. "I can't leave him. Then we move him," Coda said. But quickly, They carried him through the winding paths of the ravine, the red walls towering high above them. The sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance. Coda kept glancing back, his every sense alert. Clara could tell he was listening for something she couldn't hear. The deeper they went, the narrower the path became. The rocks pressed close, the air thick with tension. Finally, Coda stopped and set her brother down beside a boulder. "Stay here," he said. "If I don't return, follow the stream north. You'll find my people's hidden camp." Clara grabbed his arm. "Can't go alone." He looked at her then, his eyes steady. "If I do not stop them, there will be nothing left to return to." She wanted to protest, to beg him to stay, but she saw the determination in his face. He had made up his mind. Slowly, she let go. He turned and mounted his horse, disappearing into the rising dust. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Clara knelt beside her brother, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. "Try to rest," she whispered. But he kept his eyes open, watching her. "You care for him?" he said quietly. "That Apache?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked toward the direction Coda had gone, her chest tight. "He saved my life when no one else would. He's not what we were told to believe." Her brother gave a bitter smile. "Maybe not. But none of that will matter once the soldiers get here." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she still believed there was a way to stop this, but the sound of gunfire rolling through the canyon told her otherwise. The battle had reached the edge of the valley. The ground trembled beneath them. Horses thundered somewhere beyond the cliffs. Clara felt panic rise in her throat. If Coda's warriors fell, there would be no one left to defend the camp. She couldn't just sit there and wait. She stood, looking down at her brother. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, don't move." "Clara, don't go," he said weakly. "You'll be killed." "I can't just do nothing," she said. "I won't let this end in more blood." She took the narrow path upward, climbing the rocks with scraped hands and burning lungs. When she reached the top, the sight before her froze her in place. The valley below was chaos. Smoke filled the air, horses reared, and flashes of gunfire lit the haze. Apache warriors moved swiftly between the rocks, fighting from cover, while soldiers in blue uniforms advanced in tight lines. And in the center of it all, she saw Coda fighting like the wind itself, his movements precise and fierce. He was outnumbered but unstoppable, his rifle empty now, his knife flashing in the firelight. The soldiers pressed forward, their orders shouted over the roar of battle. Clara's heart pounded. She looked to the camp in the distance, where she saw women and children fleeing toward the canyons. Smoke was rising from one of the tents. If the soldiers reached them, it would be over. She ran along the ridge, searching for something, anything she could do. Then she saw a crate of powder and supplies left near one of the wagon trails. A half-broken lantern lay beside it, still flickering. A desperate thought struck her. If she could draw the soldiers away from the camp, maybe Coda and his warriors could regroup. Her hands trembled as she picked up the lantern. The fire inside glowed faintly, the glass cracked. She carried it toward the crate, her breath quick and shallow. Every sound behind her felt too close: the shouts, the gunfire, the pounding hooves. Just as she reached the powder, a voice called out behind her. "Clara." She spun around. Coda was there, covered in dust and blood, his eyes blazing. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "They'll destroy everything," she said. "If I can set this off, they'll think we're retreating in another direction." He stared at her, realization and disbelief mixing in his face. "You'll die if you stay here when it blows." "Then I'll run," she said. "You said this land tests those who are meant to stay. This is my test." Before he could answer, the sound of gunfire cracked close to close. A group of soldiers had spotted them and were charging their way. Coda grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind a rock. Bullets tore through the air, splintering wood and stone. He fired back with calm precision, each shot echoing through the canyon. "Go!" he shouted. "Do what you must, but get clear before it happens." She hesitated only a second, then nodded and crawled toward the crate. Her fingers shook as she tilted the lantern, watching the flame catch the powder trail. Spark hissed to life, spreading fast. Coda turned and shouted something to his men in Apache, his voice carrying over the chaos. The flame raced along the ground, twisting and growing brighter. The soldiers saw it too late. "Clara," Coda called out, his voice breaking through the roar. She looked back. her heart hammering. The fire was spreading faster than she expected. She ran toward him, the heat on her back like a living thing. The ground shook violently as the first explosion went off, throwing her forward. She hit the dirt hard, the sound of thunder in her ears, the world spinning around her. Through the smoke, she saw Coda running toward her, his figure blurred by dust and fire. The da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The sky above burned orange and gray, and the land itself seemed to cry out. Somewhere behind her, she could hear the soldiers shouting in confusion, their formation broken. The camp below flickered with distant firelight, but she couldn't tell who had survived. Coda reached her, pulling her to her feet. His face was streaked with soot, his breathing heavy. "Shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice rough. "I couldn't watch them take everything," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, his hand still gripping her arm, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. In the distance, the sound of fresh gunfire echoed again. The soldiers weren't finished. Reinforcements were coming. Coda turned toward the smoke-filled horizon. "This is not over," he said. And as the sun began to set behind the burning valley, Clara knew the final reckoning was close. The desert would soon decide who was meant to survive and who would be lost to its unforgiving silence. Smoke drifted low over the valley, mixing with the orange glow of the fading sunset. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and scorched earth. Clara leaned against a fallen tree, her legs trembling beneath her. Every sound around her echoed too loud, too sharp, the distant shouts, the crackle of fire, the uneasy silence that followed each gunshot. Her body ached, but she forced herself to stay upright. The fighting had slowed, but the war inside her had not. Coda stood a few paces ahead, his silhouette dark against the glowing sky. He scanned the distance, his rifle lowered, but still in hand. His hair was matted with dust, his clothes torn, yet he stood firm, steady as the land itself. Clara watched him, wondering how much more he could take. The explosion she had set off had broken the soldiers' advance, scattering them in confusion, but she knew more would come. Armies never stopped at one defeat. They would regroup, and they would return. Her brother stirred beside her, his wound now wrapped tight with fresh cloth. He was pale, weak, but alive. When he looked up at her, his eyes were full of something she hadn't seen before, a speck mixed with regret. "You saved us," he said quietly. Clara shook her head. "No," Coda did. Her brother's gaze shifted toward the Apache warrior. "He fought for you," he said. "For them, I never thought." His words faded, but the meaning was clear. He had believed all the lies they'd been told growing up, the stories that painted Coda's people as savages. Now seeing the truth had changed him in a way that no sermon or command ever could. Coda turned toward them, his face calm but eyes filled with weariness. "The soldiers are falling back," he said, "but they'll be back by sunrise." Clara's chest tightened. "Then we have to move the camp." He nodded. "The elders are already leading the families north. We'll go through the hidden pass by the river. They won't find us there." Clara bent beside her brother. "You can ride, can't you?" He managed a weak smile. "If someone helps me stay on the horse, maybe." She looked to Coda, who simply nodded and went to prepare the horses. The quiet between them carried an understanding words couldn't express. She had risked her life to protect his people, and he had risked everything to protect her. Whatever line had once divided them was gone now. By the time they reached the camp, darkness had swallowed the valley. The women and children were already packed and ready to leave. The old medicine man, who had always watched Clara with cautious eyes, approached her with a solemn expression. "You have a strong heart," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "The land sees that. It will not forget you." Clara bowed her head, humbled. "I only did what was right." He studied her for a moment before replying, "That is what the brave always say." Then he turned and walked away to help guide the others. Coda helped her brother onto a horse, then mounted his own. The night was quiet, except for the faint sound of wind and the rustle of movement through the dry brush. As they rode, Clara glanced back toward the burning horizon. The soldiers were still out there somewhere, their campfires glowing faintly like dying stars. Hours passed before they finally reached the river pass. The water reflected the moonlight like a silver ribbon, winding through the rocks. It was peaceful there, untouched by the chaos behind them. For the first time in days, Clara felt a flicker of hope. They stopped to rest before crossing. Coda dismounted and walked to the edge of the river, staring into the current. Clara followed him, her boots sinking into the damp sand. "What happens now?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. "We'll keep moving," he said finally. "There are other valleys beyond the mountains where they will not follow us. We will rebuild there." She nodded, but her heart ached at the thought of leaving everything behind. "And me?" she asked. "Where do I belong in all this?" Coda looked at her then, his gaze deep and steady. "You belong where your heart takes you. If you wish to go back to your people, you can. If you wish to stay, no one will turn you away." Clara thought of the ranch where she'd grown up, the cracked porch, the empty fields, the silence after her mother's death. There was nothing left for her there. But here, among people who had once been strangers, she had found purpose. She had found courage she didn't know she had. "I'll stay," she said quietly, "if you'll have me." A faint smile crossed his face, though his eyes softened with something deeper than words. "Then you will walk with us," he said. Before they could speak further, her brother called out weakly from where he sat by the fire. "Clara," he said, his voice low. "Come here." She went to him and knelt beside him. His face was pale, the exhaustion heavy in his eyes. "I can't go with you," he said. "Not all the way." Her heart sank. "Don't say that. You'll be fine once we find shelter." He shook his head. "I've done too much wrong to start over. But you've done what none of us ever could. You saw people as people." He gripped her hand tightly. "Don't let that change. Promise me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "I promise." He smiled faintly, and for a moment the boy she remembered from childhood was there again, the one who used to carry her on his shoulders through the wheat fields. Then his eyes closed, his hand loosening in hers. She stayed there for a long time, holding him as the night wind whispered through the valley. When morning came, the sky was pale and quiet. Coda stood beside her in silence, his presence grounding her in a way nothing else could. The others had already begun moving across the river, the water rippling around their horses' legs. Clara looked down at her brother one last time, then helped cover him with a blanket before joining Coda. They crossed the river together, the cold water biting at their feet. With every step, the sound of the past grew fainter. When they reached the far bank, Coda turned to look back at the smoke still rising from the horizon. "The land will heal," he said softly. "It always does." Clara followed his gaze. "And us?" she asked. He looked at her, and there was quiet strength in his eyes. "We will heal too." In time, they continued north, following the river as it wound through the foothills. Days passed, and the harshness of the desert slowly gave way to open plains and tall grass. The air felt cleaner, the sky wider. Each night they stopped to rest under the stars, and each morning they rode farther from the pain that had bound them. Over time, the camp grew again. New shelters built, new fires lit, laughter returning where there had once been only sorrow. Clara worked alongside Coda and his people, tending to the wounded, helping gather food, learning their ways. They treated her not as an outsider, but as one of their own. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Coda came to her side. They stood quietly, watching the horizon glow gold and red. "You've changed this place," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "No, this place changed me." He looked at her, and in that moment, she knew that whatever came next, she would never walk alone again. The past had been torn apart by fire and fear, but from its ashes, something new had taken root, something built on understanding, not division. As night settled over the land, the first stars began to appear, bright and clear. The world felt wide and full of possibility. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind touch her face. She thought of all they had lost, but also of all they had found: hope, forgiveness, and the strength to begin again. The valley behind them was silent now, its fires long faded. Ahead lay the promise of a new beginning, carved out of hardship, but shining with the quiet beauty of survival. And as Coda took her hand, leading her toward the waiting campfire, Clara felt a calm she hadn't known in years. The land around them was scarred but alive, just like them. And in that shared silence beneath the endless sky, she finally understood that peace wasn't something you found, it was something you built. One choice at a time, with courage, compassion, and the will to keep going, even when everything else had fallen away.